It never ceases to amaze me how some people join the church thinking that they are leaving behind the imperfect, money-grubbing, self-centered world, that secular world, and they are now entering a truly holy and pure monastic community where everyone is loving and kind and no one ever disagrees or spreads rumors about anything. And I usually watch that person and just to see how long it takes for that whole idyllic image to just come tumbling down. Usually it occurs by serving on one church committee or just doing one job in the church, and then we find that people withdraw and they maybe go away for a while because they're frustrated because they thought the church was going to be perfect. Or they go again on that search for that ever elusive, perfect church somewhere. It just never ceases to amaze me how perfect some people think the church should be. Presbyterians especially should know better. I mean, we believe in original sin. It's Calvinist doctrine, depravity. I mean, pride and power seep into everything we do, especially in the church, says Reinhold Niebuhr. As Henry Ward Beecher once put it, I don't need John Calvin to tell me about total depravity. I have my congregation to show me that. But remember that it's not just the congregation. Every time a preacher points a finger at a congregation, there are always three fingers pointing back. You see, sin is both radical and universal. It touches the very core of our being, the radical from the Latin root radix, which means root. It goes to the very core of our being, and it is universal. It touches every single one of us, clergy included. And it's interesting to see how some people just don't think that's going to be the case about the church. And they think that Jesus must have been misquoted as they see what the church is really like. He must have meant where two or three are gathered in my name, there's bound to be an argument. That's what they think Jesus must have meant. It's interesting to note that even though Jesus was divinely incarnate, he was not divinely naive. He knew that well-meaning Christians who gather in his name could still disagree. He knew it was not going to be easy. And so he lays out a way of dealing with disputes in the text we just read from Matthew. And then Paul follows suit in the passage we read first in Ephesians. Speaking the truth in love. There are 3 points for a whole sermon. Speaking the truth in love. We begin with speaking because that's one of the issues in the world today, just as in a marriage or a friendship or a working relationship. We have to learn how to communicate. We start with listening and then speaking and just communicating clearly with each other. A woman goes to a lawyer to get a divorce and he says, "What are your grounds?" And she says, "Well, we have 5 acres, a 3-bedroom house." And he said, no, do you have a grudge? She said, "No, we have a carport." And he says, "Does he beat you up?" And she said, "No, I always get up first thing before he does every morning." He said, "Madam, why do you want a divorce?" "We just can't seem to communicate." That's a problem in the world today. Therapists will tell you that's one of the main problems in families, in relationships, particularly between parents and children. Last week I was talking to those going off to college, what they would experience. Well, just imagine one of them comes home from college for a break during the fall. As a young man, he comes home and his dad said, "Hey, son, how's college?" "Fine." "Well, how's the dorm?" "Fine." "Well, how's the food?" "Fine." "Have you picked a major yet?" "Yes." "What is it?" "Communication." See, we have a problem sometimes communicating with one another, and the same is true in our churches. Churches where members don't know each other or don't speak to each other are usually surprised when problems arise, but they shouldn't be. They shouldn't be at all. Have you ever noticed how friendly small churches are? Have you ever visited, or maybe you grew up in or attended a small rural parish somewhere? Everyone seems to know everyone. Sometimes everyone is related to everyone, and that's another whole story in itself. I remember many churches I have preached in all over the country where you drive till the pavement runs out, and then you drive up on the grass, and you come up, and I usually have a robe there. I'm going to go preach, and there's always I remember in Western Pennsylvania back in the 70s when I was a graduate student, I'd go up to preach, and there was a stern-looking elder standing out front holding the bulletin. And he said, "Are you the preacher for this morning?" Yes, I am. And he said, "Here's the bulletin. The bathroom's down the hall on the right, and we do not descend into hell in the Apostles' Creed." It was always the same, you know. Every one of them said the same thing. Well, one of the great things about small churches is people talk to one another, and they tell you what they think. They tell it like it is, you know. And that brings us to Paul's second point. Not only are we to speak one another, we need to speak the truth to one another. We learned that as children, didn't we? From our parents, do not lie. Or the 9th commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. It's hard for us not to tell lies. We do it all the time. Scott Peck calls one of his books, People of the Lie. One of the greatest tragedies of King Lear is that people lied to him, telling him he was wise when he wasn't, or returning to him yea and nay to everything he said. When we do not speak the truth to one another, we do each other great harm. Now, the prophets knew how to speak the truth, didn't they? Oh, and "let my people go" was not said first by Martin Luther King to George Wallace or Fred Shuttlesworth to Bull Connor. It was first said by Moses to Pharaoh, who spoke the truth, or Elijah, who spoke the truth to the Baal prophets, or Nathan to David, or Amos to Amaziah. Jesus and Paul knew how to speak the truth, and they did it a lot in their communities. They said, you need to speak the truth to one another. It's much more important than gossiping behind that other person's back. Gossip is destructive. It hurts people. 3 preachers gathered for coffee one morning, 3 different denominations. You can decide which denominations they were. You can tell it any way you want. And they decided they were going to confess their sins to each other. And the first one said, well, mine's embezzlement. I've dipped into the church coffers and used money for all this kind of thing. And the second one said, mine's adultery. The third one said, mine's gossip, and I can hardly wait to get out of here. Gossip is destructive. It hurts people. Paul wants us to speak the truth, but to do it directly. Jesus says, go to the person with whom you have a difficulty. Don't talk behind their back. Don't send them an email. Don't write them a letter. Do it face to face. Don't even do it on the telephone. One of the things I learned in graduate school is that communication is only 10% verbal. That's the words you say. It's 20% visual, that's body language, and it's 70% facial. Do it in person. Do it with one another. And don't hold back. If you feel like you need to say something, you need to say it, you know? 30 years ago, I began on the board of trustees as a member of the board in Louisville Seminary, and I went to my very first board meeting. I felt so young and new to be on a board of an academic institution, and I remember sitting in the meeting and I remember thinking, geez, I ought to say something about this, but I'm so new and young, and I was always instructed by my parents, when you're young and new, you don't speak up, you kind of get to know the people, and then maybe, and I whispered to the gentleman sitting next to me, who happened to be a retired CEO of a large company in Ohio, and I whispered, I think such and such. He said, well, you ought to say something about it. I said, no, I'm so new and I'm so young. I don't think so. And he whispered, you need to say something. And I said, no, I don't think so. So we interrupted the whole meeting. Mr. Chair, Dr. Carl has something he wants to say. And I was outed at that moment. But it was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because I began to learn it's okay to speak up. In marriages, if you don't speak up when you are hurt by something or you have experienced something that is difficult, and then you put it in a gunny sack and then you do it again and you do it again, pretty soon that gunny sack gets so big you can't handle it anymore, and one more little thing is said and the whole gunny sack explodes, and the other person says, where in the world did that come from? Paul says, don't let the sin go down on your anger. Don't let your anger go down on the day. Go ahead and deal with it. Go ahead and deal with it today. So he wants us to speak the truth, and some people are really good at that, right? Some people seem to enjoy speaking the truth and just telling it like it is, and I think some people just enjoy it way too much. Now, George Barnard Shaw was that kind of person. While he was still a music critic, one night he went with a friend to a restaurant that, as entertainment, provided an orchestra that was at best mediocre. It just wasn't a very good orchestra. And the orchestra conductor was so excited, recognizing Shaw in the audience, that he had a note sent to him that said, what would you like for the orchestra to play next? And Shaw wrote, Dominoes. I mean, this is blunt, you see, this is speaking the truth, but it's really blunt. But Shaw met his match in Churchill, because once he sent 2 tickets to Churchill for the opening night of his play St. Joan, and he wrote a note with it, says, 1 ticket for you and 1 for a friend if you have one. And Churchill replied, I will be unable to attend the opening night, but could you give me 2 tickets to the second night, that is, if there is one. And you had this kind of, interchange, people who know how to speak the truth. And of course, there's the famous Lady Astor and Winston Churchill, their whole way of dealing with one another. Lady Astor turns to Churchill and says, Winston, if you were my husband, I'd put poison in your coffee. And he replies, if you were my wife, I'd drink it. And so, we have this whole interchange between people who speak the truth to one another. Paul then adds a third phrase for those kind of people. Maybe you live with someone like that who is just so blunt and speaks the truth so dramatically and painfully. Paul adds another phrase, en agape in Greek, in love. How important it is when you are speaking to a friend, a loved one, a fellow church member, or let's just bring in the Jesus from Matthew, one of your enemies. Because Jesus in Matthew says, love your enemies. Whomever you're speaking to, you need to speak the truth in love. And agape, 3 kinds of love, we all know those: eros, romantic love; philios, friendship love; agape is sacrificial love. Paul spells it out in 1 Corinthians 13. It's patient and kind. It's not jealous or boastful. It's not arrogant or rude. It's not irritable or resentful. It does not insist on its own way. It does not rejoice at the wrong, which means it doesn't nitpick. It rejoices in the right, which means it lifts the other up. Now, this doesn't mean you get rid of conflict. What this means is healthy conflict, as opposed to unhealthy conflict. Wherever I've worked, church or the seminary, I've instituted something called the 4 S's for a positive, happy, healthy culture. And they go like this: no secrets, no surprises, no subversion, and lots of support. No secrets means transparency. You're not having to guess where the leadership is going or what's going on. Now, obviously, you have some confidential things, some pastoral things. You can't share everything. But it's important to be transparent. And no secrets means no gossiping, no negative emails. No surprises. You don't surprise a group with this or an individual with that. No subversion. You didn't like the way the vote occurred, but you didn't say anything in the meeting. You waited and poisoned it in the parking lot. That won't work. That's subversion. And lots of support. That's the cheerleading one. Now, when an institution follows the 4 S's, then you have a positive, happy, healthy culture. I've been to several meetings of committees here, and I have to tell you, I know I'm preaching to the choir because you already understand how to do this very well. You understand that there's no way to eliminate conflict, but that in healthy conflict, real friendship in Christ means we have the right to disagree, knowing that mutual respect and affection are not at stake. That's what speaking the truth in love and agape really means. An altar boy in a large cathedral drops a cruet of wine, and it makes a huge disturbance. And the village priest in charge slaps him across the face and says, "Leave the altar and don't come back." Do you know who that boy grew up to be? Marshal Tito, the communist leader of Yugoslavia. Another boy in another cathedral, in another place, also drops a cruet of wine, and the bishop, with a warm twinkle in his eye, gently whispers, "It's okay, son. Someday you will be a priest." You know who that boy became? Archbishop Fulton Sheen. How do we speak? We speak the truth. We speak the truth in love to one another. And in so doing, we will fulfill not only the law and all the prophets, we will be fulfilling the gospel of Jesus Christ. To him be all honor and blessing and glory and praise from this day forth and forevermore. God bless you all.